Hi everyone, welcome back to Horrible Histories Club. This week we are looking at the Wicked Wild West. Okay, so how the West was nicked. At the beginning of the nasty 19th century, the new United States of America got rid of all the bossy Brits, and now it was time to get rid of all those Indians who had the cheek and to have lived there for nearly 10,000 years. History was about to become really horrible. The new USA was much bigger than before. Its borders stretched from the Great Lakes down to Florida, and from the Atlantic all the way across to the Mississippi River. Many new Americans couldn't wait to leave the cities and towns on the East Coast, and they headed west. They went for fun, they went to buy cheap land and start new lives, or to dodge the long arm of the law. As the settlers moved towards Mississippi, they met the Indians who lived there. The Indians weren't too keen to share their land. Luckily for the settlers, and not so lucky for the Indians, the government had already bought a large plot of land from the French between the Mississippi River and the Rocky Mountains. President Jackson, or Old Longknife as the Indians called him, came up with a plan. Chuck them over the Mississippi into the wilds. The government called this removal. All of the Indian tribes were removed from the land east of the Mississippi. The ones who didn't want to go were massacred, and the ones who did died of pneumonia in the winter and cholera in the summer. The Cherokees, who lost a quarter of their nation on the journey to their new home, called it the Trail of Tears. So, with the Indians stashed away in their new home, the Americans decided to attack the Mexicans instead, and within a couple of years they had won 1 million square miles of land, or California, and this turned out to be a bit of a windfall. In 1848, gold was discovered in California, and the greatest gold rush in history of the USA began. People rushed to the region to look for gold. These prospectors became known as 49ers, not the 48ers. It took them a long time to get there. California's population grew and grew, from 14,000 in 1848 to 100,000 in 1850. These gold-hungry folk were pretty lawless. Sheriffs were thin on the ground, so miners took law into their own hands. The constant stream of settlers heading west no longer stopped at the Mississippi. They carried on driving the Indians from their land they had only just been promised, and the settlers came by the wagon load. Nothing stood in the way of these plucky pioneers, least of all the Indians that lived there. They cut down pine forests, which had provided food and shelter for the Indians, to make houses, furniture and tools and fences, and they set about farming the land. They settled in the dry plains, making houses out of earth and dry buffalo dung, and digging wells for water. They followed rivers and trails into the mountain country. It was pretty wild indeed out west, but things weren't much better on the so-called settled side of the Mississippi. In 1861, the north and southern states of the new United States of America were slugging it out with each other in a very uncivil war. But when the Civil War was over, the Americans began moving west again. By the time they could get there faster, as railroad companies were racing each other to build tracks across the country. Cattle and sheep ranching spread across the plains and deserts. Settlers turning into cowboys and drove their cattle thousands of miles to get to the railroads. Meanwhile, things were about to change for the Indians living happily in the Black Hills of Dakota, because gold was discovered, so the miners moved in. When the Indians rebelled against the invading miners, General Custer and his 7th Cavalry went in to sort out Chief Crazy Horse, Chief Sitting Bull, and the Sioux troublemakers. But Custer came a cropper. He was outwitted by the Indians, and he was killed along with all of his men at the Battle of Little Bighorn. This didn't please the American government one tiny bit, so they turned their full force on the Indians, penning them into reservations, and it was the end for the free Native American Indian. Here we are, we've got Custer's last stand. So glory-seeking General Custer took on the village of Sioux Indians at the Battle of Little Bighorn and came a cropper. I bet it was Sioux, sorry. Pun there. Okay, so after attacking the Indian village full of women and children on Little Bighorn River, Custer's men were beaten back. The Indian warriors were in no mood for mercy, and they left no man alive. There we can see, can't we, the Indian warriors? When Indian braves killed a man, they would scalp him. They would take his hair and scalp off with a knife. Sometimes they took the scalps of people who weren't quite dead. And there we are, right at the bottom there, we can see someone being scalped. The braves were batty for boldness. Here, an unarmed warrior counts coup or pokes a cavalryman in the rib with his coup stick. Here it is, look, we can see the stick. American Indians were very superstitious about their dead. If a dead warrior was left on the battlefield, he wouldn't be able to get to the happy hunting grounds or Indian heaven. So there we are, we can see them taking the warriors away. Imagine trying to hold scared horses still. It took a man out of the battle and was not easy. There we are, look, see him struggling, the horses. The US Army used Crow Indians as scouts. There we are, we can see one there. Custer told his men to shoot their horses and use them as barricades. He was ready to make his last stand. There we are, we can see General Custer and start with a barricade of horses. Okay, that's it for this week's Horrible Histories Club. Hope you enjoyed it, hope you've learned something new, and tune in next week. Thank you.